Welcome to Diversability Unplugged, Workplace Realities. I'm Kieran O'Brien Kern.
Okay. Oh, Kieran, wait just like we're gonna let people in 1 minute.
Sorry.
Because everybody's like a floodgate of people that come in. So we're just gonna give them a little bit of time, like
Just
1 more
kidding,
minute.
yeah. I don't jump the shark at all. Welcome to Diversability Unplugged, Workplace Realities. I'm Kieran O'Brien Kern. My pronouns are she, her. I have short, dark, wavy hair, fair skin, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a black and white animal print top. Tonight, we are gathered virtually to honor International Day of People with Disabilities. Their theme is Building Back Better towards a disability inclusive, accessible, and sustainable post COVID 19 world. One of the benefits, if you can say that, of the pandemic is that it has moved the working world into the digital space, making it more inclusive to the disabled population. With that, we are very lucky to welcome Andrea Dalzell, Eric Harris, Joe Vasquez, and Rachel Handler to discuss working disabled in a non disabled universe. Everyone, please introduce yourselves and let us know what was your first job? Rachel.
Sure. Thanks for the intro. I'm Rachel Handler, and my first job, well, ever as a human being, was working in a chocolate store on the boardwalk in Ocean City, New Jersey. I grew up by the beach and had a lot of fun working there, eating fudge and chocolates and all of that. But my first job when I became disabled actually was very different. I was specifically looking for a job where I could work from home because I lost my leg and was getting used to wearing a prosthetic leg. So I couldn't do the jobs that I had been doing before that required me to be on my feet for, 8 or 12-hour days. So I ended up finding a really nice work from home job where I could do event planning and just answer emails and calls and do contracts and things like that from home. So that was really my first job as a person with a disability. Oh, and I guess I should do like an audio description of myself. Sorry, I'm Rachel, and I am a white woman with long brown hair. that has not been cut since quarantine. And I am wearing a light blue blouse, and I'm sitting in a room with white walls and a purple curtain to my right.
Great. What about Eric? Go ahead.
Hello, thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Eric Harris. I am a special advisor with Disability Rights California here in Sacramento, California. So it's still sunny here on the West Coast, or at least the sun's still up on the West Coast. I am an African American male. I have short dark hair, and I have a beard and a mustache. I am wearing a red, white, and blue striped long sleeve shirt with a gray tie and a blue sweater with a zipper partly down. And I am in a room with white walls and a mirror closet behind me. And my first I guess, real job was working at Target. And actually, I started off when I was at Target as a person who put away a lot of the items, a lot of the clothes. And that job was actually a little too difficult in terms of moving around and getting around the store. So they talked to me, and I was able to communicate with them what my preference was because of my disability. And I was able to be a cashier actually during the holidays a long time ago, years ago. But yes, that was my first job.
Fantastic. Andrea, what about you, my friend?
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea. I am an African American woman who uses a wheelchair. I have long black hair that I also have not cut since quarantine began. That is pulled back into a ponytail at the current moment. I'm wearing a black shirt that says New York Strong with the letters RN in red because I am a registered nurse. My first job ever was in a hat store known as Lids. That was my first mall job at the age of 14, and I had already had my disability when I was employed for this particular employer.
Awesome. Okay, Joe, let us have it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for hosting me. My name is Joe Vasquez. As a quick description, I am wearing glasses. I have blue eyes, short brown hair. I've been trying to grow this beard since I was 13, but it's not successful. I have a shirt that says Fuerza Mexico, and I'm wearing a native Central American print long sleeve shirt. I'm a venture partner at a fund called Revel Partners, which is based out of New York City. It is a $50 million B2B SaaS fund focused on early stage startups. My first job was working on a horse ranch where I shoveled horse manure all day, and I used to have splinters in my hand. And I loved to be able to I love to be able to communicate with horses using body language and really connecting with animals. And I think a lot of people communicate how they're feeling using their body language. And that's one of the many benefits of being deaf, hard of hearing, is that I'm able to understand and empathize with people much more effectively.
That's wonderful. And having spent time in corporate America, I think the shoveling probably really helped you. Just out of curiosity, either growing up or as adults, what narratives were you told around disability or work from family, from school, from HR departments? What did you go into this thinking? Either if you're born disabled or acquired your disability, what were you told? Anybody can grab that one.
So I'll
I'm
go first.
go ahead.
This is Andrea speaking. So I was never actually told anything from my parents about being able to get a job other than I needed to get a job. And this was at 14. So it was more along the lines of if you want money, you have to work for it, whether that was going to be in the household or outside of the house. And I never thought that my pay was equal to what I was doing for my chores within the house, which is why I went looking for work at the mall where all of my friends were looking for work at that point in time. On the flip side of that, in the school setting, I went to a public school in New York City. My teachers and all of the admin staff would often tell me that I wouldn't be able to do certain jobs, that I needed to figure out working from the desk, or if I would work in an office space, or maybe I can be an intern that would maybe help me get into another position. But when I had came back one day and told them, oh yeah, I work at Hat's Lid Store after school for 4 hours a day, 2 days a week or 3 days a week, they were all like, oh wow, that's nice. But no other encouragement came along with that. It was just like, oh, that's good for you. That's it.
That's really familiar. What about anybody else? What were you guys told? What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. My father's family is from Spain and from Cuba, and my father worked really hard to assimilate into the mainstream dominant narrative where Latinos were singled out or ostracized in American society. And I think he brought a lot of that into my disability, where he didn't quite say it, but I always felt like he was a little bit embarrassed about my disability and wanted me to be somewhat mainstreamed. So I went from an all-deaf school to a traditional public school around the time I got into kindergarten, first grade. And I knew I was immediately different. And I would hear teachers, friends, family members say phrases like deaf and dumb, which was a common phrase that didn't necessarily mean that someone was, deaf, or they were dumb because they were deaf. It was just this phrase that at the time was kind of mainstream and kind of taken for granted. And every time I heard that, I assumed that I was deaf and I was dumb. Um, so I think a lot of it was around language, even though it wasn't necessarily, intentional. And I internalized that a lot. So I'm very intentional about trying to choose words and use language in a way that is uplifting and empowering for other people. So I had to learn that the hard way.
Definitely, definitely. Anybody else? Were you told?
Yes.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, this is Eric. And just to kind of explain my disability, so I was born with congenital hip dislocation. So I had nerve damage in my left hip, left knee, left ankle, left foot, and right ankle. And so for the first period of my life, I used leg braces and walked exclusively. And so that was an interesting experience for me, but it was something that I had always lived with. So it wasn't anything kind of special or unique to me. It was just what what my experience was. But I did start to recognize. I went to all private schools growing up in Northern California, and as I was going to school, I did recognize that I was the only person that I knew of with a visible disability. Of course, there could have been a number of other students with invisible disabilities that I didn't know of, but as far as I was aware of, I was the only person with a visible disability in school. Um, and my parents, I was very fortunate that I had parents that really encouraged me to engage and interact with as many other people as I could. For me, that brought sports. I participated in a lot of sports with other kids without disabilities growing up, from baseball, basketball, football, tennis, golf. I was just any sport all year long, whether it was good weather outside, bad weather outside, I wanted to play sports, and I was engaged in sports with other kids. And I say all that to say that was a big part of my upbringing, and it led me to participate in adaptive sports. And adaptive sports kind of brought a mentality that people with disabilities can accomplish anything. Whether they were wheelchair users, whether they were, it didn't matter what type of disability they had. And so I participated in wheelchair basketball to start off with in Berkeley, California, with the Bay Area Outreach Recreation Program. And it really opened my eyes and led me to a life of advocacy. And all the way through that process, I was really encouraged by my parents, by my family, by my teammates, by people that I met throughout the country who played adaptive sports and had different types of disabilities, to get involved in disability rights issues, but also that I could accomplish anything. So whether it was in school, in college, or in law school, I always felt encouraged that I could accomplish anything with a disability at the same levels as anybody else.
It's amazing what a positive environment can do. Now, I mean, Rachel, your disability is acquired, so it must have been an interesting situation for you to be in 8 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid growing up, I did not have a disability. And I sometimes wonder if I did have a disability, if I would have gone into the performing arts, just because, you know, disability representation is so few and far between. And when we do see people with disabilities in movies or on TV shows, it's all represented as bad. You know, disability is bad. It makes you evil, or it puts you in the hospital and you never live a life again. Or, you know, you're so inspiring because you can open the door. So we have all of these portrayals of disability that are so inauthentic. So I'm, in a way, very fortunate that I acquired my disability later. I acquired it about 8 years ago. And disability portrayals, even in the past 5 years, have grown exponentially better. There's still so much work to do. Like the movie The Witches just came out with Anne Hathaway, and there's been a lot of controversy with her hands in that movie. They made her hands have 2 fingers on them, and they present that part of her body as making her evil. And when that's the only representation of that type of disability that we see on screen, what does that tell us as a society? It tells us that people with those types of hands are bad, and it's a bad thing. And that's completely the opposite of what we should be seeing. We should be seeing characters with missing an arm or with fingers like that, you know, adapting to their circumstances, and, you know, being able to use a can opener with one hand and things like that, and be like, oh, that's so cool, instead of seeing it as evil. So there's a long way to go, but I'm feeling very fortunate that when I acquired my disability, I was able to Google other actors with disabilities and find a community here in New York City and feel support and encouragement. And, you know, just 2 years after I became disabled, the Disability Film Challenge started, which started offering more opportunities for filmmakers with disabilities to get seen within the industry. So I feel like, in a weird way, I became disabled at just the right time for me. And I wouldn't take it back in a second. You know, that's another thing people always ask. It's like, ooh, if you could, you know, erase that day of your car accident, would you do that? Would you, you know, take away that part of your life? And I'm always like, absolutely not, because it's such a big part of me. And I don't think things happen for a reason, but I do think that I took that situation and I really made it my own. And I can't imagine not being part of this beautiful community of people with disabilities.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And to your point, I 18 years ago, when I was one of the years of my college experience, I was told by two different professors, because I wanted to be both an actress or on the production side, that I would not get hired. So, needless to say, I'm a writer and
Yeah.
I do wonderful things like this, which is fine. I'm enjoying clearly the heck out of myself. But anyway, so guys, you wonderful people, please share your experiences kind of finding or gaining your foothold in your workspace, in your workplace, because you all are doing vastly different things that people are really curious about how you got there. Let's talk about that.
I think I started touching on this a little bit. But yeah, when I lost my leg, I think I actually mentioned this on our other call. I went to an audition for a musical and I was so excited about my new prosthetic leg. I was walking again. I was excited to be able to audition for a musical with this prosthetic leg. And I sang my song, and then the casting director and the music director behind the table looked at me and said, you know, you sound beautiful and we'd like to call you back, but it's a dance callback. So, ha ha ha. And sort of just laughed me out of the room. And that was basically my first job interview as a woman with a disability. So I took from that experience that I, had to seriously think about if I still wanted to pursue this career. And thank goodness that didn't dissuade me from this career. But I did stop auditioning for musicals for a bit, and I turned to writing and producing and directing. And I figured if no one's going to give me a chance to act and do the roles that I want to play, just as a woman with a disability who's still a human being, then I would write them myself and I would cast other actors with disabilities in those films. So there was an organization called Inclusion in the Arts. It no longer exists, but about 7 or 8 years ago, I reached out to them, and that's how I started meeting people. And I think there's such power in just Googling, agencies that work with people with disabilities, like KMR out in LA. They have a whole diversity section that's dedicated to disability. There are schools now, like Queen's Theater does a Theater for All program specifically for performers with disabilities. And Access Acting Academy is a new program that specifically works with performers with disabilities. And then you can find, private teachers who will really work one-on-one with you as well. Because I found that when I went to college, my favorite class was my one-on-one voice lesson. It was kind of like my therapy, my saving grace. So I always recommend, when you can find someone to really work with you, that's a great ticket to finding your voice and finding your freedom within the career that you've chosen. And I can't recommend enough the Disability Film Challenge. If you're an actor, producer, writer, director, whatever, just gathering a team. You can reach out to me if you need help. I'm happy to share any advice I can and help connect you with other people with disabilities within the industry, because I think that's a great jumping off point.
Great. Just a quick question, quick second. I want to remind everyone to submit questions for our Q&A later, and I'd like to throw that question to Andrea.
So for me, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I did not always have my heart set on being a nurse. I never even seen a nurse in a wheelchair before me. And just a little backtrack on that as well. I think that all of us who have disabilities, when you're going into any clinic or healthcare office, you're usually being treated by someone who has no idea what your disability actually is, or what your disability means to you, and how you are going to live your life as an individual with your disability. So as a healthcare worker, we're automatically faced with this blockade to someone who's going to be living their life with a disability that they've had either from birth or have acquired. And 9 times out of 10, that first impression is always, tell me about yourself. Oh, you can't walk? Are you working? Are you sexually active? Those questions aren't coming out of a healthcare worker's mouth. They don't even care. It's like, oh my goodness, how are you going to take care of someone with a disability if you don't even know how to talk to us? So that was my initial set point. I was like, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to be a doctor. And I am very fortunate that I have parents and a family that stood behind me in my dreams. And every time I faced no's from the outside world, my family was like, well, how are you going to make it a yes? We're here to support you. What do you need to do? Who do we need to talk to? Uh, and I'm lucky in that sense. And I'm blessed in that sense, because some people facing no in society is just going to stop. And society's telling me no. So therefore, there's nowhere else to go. When you think about how public school in New York City is, and what I said before, where admin and teachers were already telling me, oh, that's good for you, that's great, but you might not get further past this point, or we can't see you in that particular field. Maybe you should think about something else. It's constantly dropping these gems into your mind and your subconscious to kind of doubt yourself and doubt who you can be. And then you have to kind of find your own voice to say, no, but I can do it. And how do I get there? I never knew how I was going to get anywhere. It was just more along the lines of, I knew what I wanted, and I didn't want to settle for someone else telling me no, because they're not living their life on my wheels. So therefore, how can I listen to them? That was where I struggled, because when I got into nursing school and I had all of these nurses telling me, you can't be a nurse in a wheelchair. I'm like, but you guys aren't in a wheelchair. How are you telling me I can't be a nurse in a chair? You don't even know my movements. You don't even know what I can and can't do, but yet you have this hold over a profession to tell me that I can't do it. I think that the narrative shift, like Eric mentioned before, where you have to have this sense of positivity, or you have to have at least this sense of optimism to be able to give someone with a disability hope, to be able to break past the no, or be able to break past their own self-doubt, because doubt is already around us. We get that. But we need that one person, like Rachel said, that's willing to mentor or willing to stay there and say, you know what, let's give you this chance. Let's figure out what those workarounds would be. And that's how I got to the point where I'm at now. I had people in my life that said, what are going to be the workarounds? How can we put this into place? This is what I want. So therefore, if she wants it, let's figure out what the steps would be. How do we change it so that it incorporates her disability the way she needs to effectively move in the position that she's going for?
That's fantastic. And it probably leads into my next question, which I'm going to throw to Eric. Eric, how have role models, allyship, or sponsorship played a role in your success?
That's been a major part of my success, and it's been both with people without disabilities and people with disabilities. Part of my experience coming up after, kind of as a high school student athlete, then a college student athlete, was experiencing, different levels of uh, accessibility versus inaccessibility. And part of that showed itself in some of my travels, especially while I was on the East Coast. While I was on the East Coast, I experienced inaccessibility when it came to public transportation. I know several of my fellow panelists spent some time in New York City. New York has an extensive subway system, but I'm sure we would all agree lack of accessibility when it comes to elevator usage and beyond. And it's just frustrating beyond belief. So part of my allyship comes from my family, I spoke about earlier. In one experience that I had in New York, and it would have happened multiple times if I would have kept going kind of down the same route. But my brother had to carry my wheelchair up the stairs at every single subway stop that I went to in New York, except for, of course, the touristy locations of Times Square and some of the other ones where elevators currently work. But in the biggest and in most people's views, best city in the United States, we struggle still with accessibility needs when it comes to public transportation that should be accessible to everybody. So that's one example. My family, my brother, but it extends beyond that, and it extends to some of my former coaches, some of my coaches who did not have disabilities but decided to be allies and be sponsors and go beyond just simply speaking up for, but really challenging people with disabilities. I had coaches in high school, coaches in college, professors in law school that really challenged me beyond kind of the typical, as Rachel was saying, oh, it's so cute that you're able to do X, Y, and Z. Or as Andrea was saying, oh, it's so nice that you want to experience what it's like to be a nurse. But it's another thing when you meet somebody who really pushes you beyond what you believe you can do and what others expect you to do. And so that's a really big thing. And I've seen it, whether it's been in the workspace. Fortunately, I've been very intentional about choosing workspaces that fit me. So whether it was majoring in Africana studies so that I could work at the NAACP, where I knew I would have allies and partners, or working at Disability Rights California, where I knew that other people, other attorneys at Disability Rights California, other advocates would also have disabilities and lived experience, so they understand what it's like and why accessibility is so important. But that's not always the case for everybody. I know that not everybody can choose specific spaces in work. Sometimes they have to get, kind of what's presented to them. But I would encourage all people with disabilities to intentionally search for mentors, partners, friends, allies, sponsors that are in line with the same mindset as you. I think that that's the best way to kind of move forward and be productive and have your kind of mental health in the best space that it can be, especially when you run into really challenging times.
Definitely. That was amazing. And I'm as a Jersey girl, I can attest to New York being an absolute veritable proving ground to those
I
of us
just
who
wanted to add really quickly, since it fits so perfectly with what you just said and Eric just said. My first script that won a Sundance Award was called The A Doesn't Stand for Accessible. And it was about the subway system. And it was about how in Queens and Astoria, they did these cosmetic renovations and didn't include elevators or an escalator. I'm told the last station that they're renovating is going to have an elevator, or might already. It took a bunch of years and millions of dollars before they did that. But I think it might finally be accessible. So that's the one stop you can go to in Astoria if you use a wheelchair or crutches or anything like that.
Tiffany just said in the chat we might need a screening of that. But I do want to throw that question to Joe, because I think Joe has some good insights on allyship and sponsorship, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to take a little bit of a step back and kind of highlight the fact that my disability is a little bit hidden in the sense that I can choose who and when and how I present my disability. And more often than not, I would opt not to show my disability because I was embarrassed for years of people telling me that I was less than. So I would oftentimes come into the workplace and people would be like, oh, you have, an interesting accent. And, if I liked them, I would tell them, hey, actually, I'm, deaf, hard of hearing. Or if I was like, I'd just pretend like I'm from Germany or from somewhere else in the world and pretend like I had a different accent. And then the other thing that would happen is if people didn't know that I had a disability, they would assume that I'm being rude or that I was ignoring them in a meeting or in a conversation. So it created personal tension or interpersonal tension with other people that I was working with. And it wasn't until I started to become more aware of that and proud of my disability and proud of the fact that I was different, that I was able to have a sense of pride and self-respect. And other people started to respect me for who I was and for all of my differences. So to go to the question around allyship, one of my first jobs was with a startup called Enuma, or Locomotive Labs. And we were building math applications for students with special needs. And we grew from 1 million students to 8 million students on the platform. And we're building really inclusive apps for kids all around the world. And the senior leadership on the team was really incredible. And they did a lot of things. Namely, they actively reinforced points that I brought up in a meeting. So they made me feel heard, respected, and validated. They used tools like sticky notes to make things more visual and accessible. So we would do brainstorming on the table or the wall using sticky notes, making it more accessible for me. They would situate meeting rooms so that everybody was facing each other and that I could read their lips. And finally, they were just proactive. They asked me, hey, what can I do to support you? How can we make this easier? We want to win together and you're a critical part of the team. So those were some easy ways. And it doesn't really take a lot to be an ally. It just takes being proactive to recognize your own sense of privilege and to look out for other people. So.
That's fantastic. So my follow-up question is, what do you know now that you would have loved to share with yourself starting out? Andrea.
What would I want to share with myself? I think for all those nights where I was faced with deciding if I was a student or deciding if I was a disability rights advocate in my classroom, uh, would have been to speak up a little bit more. I did settle a lot in just allowing other people to kind of dictate what was going to be my future and me kind of falling in line and maybe saying, oh, I don't like this once in a while, or pushing back when I really felt that it was just unfair. But it should never have gotten to the point of me feeling like it was unfair. I should have been speaking up the moment things were presented to me and they weren't accessible, or they were presented to me and the comments behind it were saying, she's never going to be a nurse. She's never going to be able to do CPR. And me hearing that, because that kind of just laid that self-doubt foundation for myself. And I think that it's extremely pivotal when the society is already laying this foundation for us, right? We heard Joe just say he gets to disclose when and when he doesn't disclose his disability. That's a luxury for some of us. Whereas my disability is completely visible. I wish I can hide it. So the moment I'm going into a room, that judgment's already being placed. And I know that judgment. I'm pretty sure Rachel has felt that judgment. I'm sure Eric has felt that judgment. I'm even sure Joe has felt that judgment. I'm sure you have felt that judgment. Where you go into a room and you automatically know that you're different. You automatically know that people are thinking the worst case scenario. Because like Rachel said, our representation shows us as evil, incapable, should be hospitalized. Why are you out in the world? Let's clap it up for you because you're not home eating bonbons and you went out to get some oranges from the grocery store. You came to class this morning, or you're dealing with your chronic pain. It's kind of like shoving our disability back into our back pocket, forgetting that we're disabled and trying to put on this great face that we're able in whatever setting that we're trying to be in. And that layer of self-doubt to ourselves sticks, and it sticks like cement, and you can't get it off. So now you hear everybody else saying it to you, and then you're not allowed to just be a student. You're not allowed to just focus on your dreams and your profession or what you want to do and what you enjoy in life. And I wish for 1 second that I would have been like, stop what you're saying. Do you hear yourself? Do you think that's appropriate from a teacher or a professor to be saying to a student, or from an employer to be saying to an employee, or anyone to be saying to any human? Because that weight we already put on ourselves, or what society has already implemented for us, because we're growing into a society that's not made for us. And then we're in these capacities where people are also telling you you can't be. When does my voice matter? When does what I want matter? And then when does my capabilities prove to you that everything that you thought is null and void? So I really do wish that I did have that voice to be able to say, hold up, you're a professor, you're a teacher, you should not be saying that.
I totally relate to that. I feel like we are taught, at least I'm an incredibly defiant Irish woman, and it was never until I was pushed to literally to the back wall that I verbally came out swinging and then made change. I have a feeling you're pretty similar, or
Yeah,
maybe at the time.
100%. Like I said, we've all felt that. We all feel
Yeah.
this layer of just weight that our disability kind of keeps on us, just because, not because we want it there.
Because society puts it there.
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
What about you, Eric? What would you have told your younger self?
A couple of things that I probably would have told myself. I would have told myself um, first that I'm not alone, that there are, I mean, at the low end, and of course, the statistics aren't exact, but at the low end, 25% of people have some level of disability. And that's, however many choose not to disclose, however many have not been diagnosed with a disability. But that would have been very comforting if I would have known when I was in school, where I thought that I was the only person in my class or the only person at my school with a disability, that there are other students, that there are teachers, that maybe the principal, there are other people around me who have lived experience with a disability, and that they can relate and I can relate to them. I think that that would have been really empowering for me as a young person. The other thing that I really wish I would have been aware of earlier is that all people with disabilities are essentially on the same team. We don't need to separate ourselves, wheelchair user versus wheelchair user versus person who's hard of hearing versus person who might have a mental health disability or a psychiatric disability or a vision impairment. We're all on the same team in terms of we're all fighting for advocacy and accessibility. And I think that understanding that and being able to work together as one unit makes us even stronger. Meeting Joe through this process has been a really cool experience for me. I can't wait to continue to work with Joe, to continue to work with other people with different types of disabilities, so that we can accomplish some of the goals that we're trying to accomplish. And something that I also wish I would have known a little bit earlier um, is understanding intersectionality. Of course, I live intersectionality every day. I'm an African American male with a disability, so I understand the layers and kind of the different ways that my disability and my race impacts me. But just to be able to understand it on the highest level that I can to impact my community, to help the Black community in ways that I can, and explain to the Black community ways that disability impacts our community in that way, and ways that the disability movement and the disability community can improve when it comes to how the disability community interacts with people of different races. So I think that those are some ways that we can all still be better. I work in this space every day at Disability Rights California, but it's still something that needs to continue to improve. We need to see more voices, more LGBTQ voices. We need to see more women of color with disabilities. I mean, this needs to be a normal part of the disability movement. So that's what I would say in terms of what I would have known earlier.
Sorry, I agree 100%. And it's funny because I've never seen so much whitewashing as I have in our community when you look at activism. And growing up, when you said you were the only disabled person, I also was the only disabled person. So all of my friends were the people of color because we were all marginalized together. So it was me and the assorted shades of brown and beige. Um, Rachel, when those directors laughed at you, what do you wish you had known?
Ooh, so much. And I do just want to real quick mention, I am so glad we're talking about the intersectionality of disability, because I understand there are white men with cerebral palsy, but I don't need to see another TV show about them. And I think we need some more authentic representation of other types of disabilities, other ethnicities, other genders and sexual orientations. So, and I would never say something like that 5 years ago, but I've definitely, grown into myself, and I would tell myself, do not be ashamed to ask for the accommodations that you need, especially as an actor. We're sort of not last on the totem pole, but there's so many actors in the world that when we get on set, we're just grateful to have that job. And especially as an actor with a disability, it's just like, thank you for casting me. I'm so glad to be here. And then we don't say when the trailer is inaccessible. We don't say where there aren't any foods that we can eat or reach or whatever. So I would say, do not be ashamed to ask for what you need. Do not be ashamed to ask for your accommodations. That is your right. You are there as an employee, and they should be able to accommodate any accessibility requests you have. And that is not being a burden. That is being a human. There are plenty of stars who get, just so much leeway on sets and cost the producers millions of dollars. So if you're asking for like a little $5 accommodation here, there shouldn't be an eye blinked over that request. Even if it's more than $5, it is your right, and do not be ashamed or embarrassed to ask for that accommodation. And if it's not, if you're expecting an accommodation to be offered and it's not, still bring it up if you need it. So I would say that. And then I would also say, mentally acquiring a physical disability where my body changed. I was ashamed to go out in public without a prosthetic leg. And I would tell myself, you're still you. If people stare, they stare, but you can't change their minds overnight. You can't educate everyone on disability and politeness. So just live your life without worrying about what other people think, especially when it comes to your body. So I would definitely take away the shame from the disability experience, because we are strong as hell and there is no need for shame.
Exactly. So what do you all think? You guys are so amazingly smart, and I'm learning so much from you. That the workplace, that the community at large, the workplace at large can do better. Let's start with Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I just want to bring up one point from the last question really quickly because I think it segues really nicely into this question. And for a long time, I wasn't I wasn't clear or I didn't really understand how power dynamics worked in the workplace. Largely, thinking that I just get hired for a job, I do XYZ job, and that's really it. But there's an interesting nuance when you have a disability, and if you have the right mindset, you could frame your disability in terms of an asset for the organization. It allows you to build products that maybe connect with new markets. It allows you to empathize with new user segments. Disabilities can be, and they usually are, a huge asset for organizations. And I think it's incumbent upon us, and especially myself, to, I'll frame my disability in a way that is beneficial for the organization, not just a burden. And to go back to your question about what can organizations do to better accommodate or support people with disabilities, and Rachel was bringing up the point before about offering accommodations more proactively, and it shouldn't be an issue at all. And the second thing is doing being more intentional about diversifying the workplace with respect to intersectionality, as Eric was talking about before. So across race, sexual orientation, and disability as well. So being more intentional about that, because it really is an asset when you're building your company.
I'm gonna jump in on that one because I know that we know as a group what accommodations mean. But I can tell you firsthand, HR has no idea what accommodations are, how long they should last, what cost should it be. They know nothing. And then when it transfers over to the next director of HR, they have no idea that you have accommodations. And that's where 90% of people with disabilities get the axe at a job. So it is important that when we're talking about what accommodations are, what they mean, how they're individualized for anyone going into any sector of employment, accommodation is just, it's not a band-aid that you get to put on and say, yes, here, we're giving it to you, you should be grateful. No, accommodations literally equals the playing field for us to be able to do the job that we not only love and know how to do, but be that asset to the employer, to be that asset to the people that we're going to be building for, creating for, or caring for. I can tell you that in nursing, there's no such thing as accommodation. What is that? And I can say that knowing that mothers that are nurses that are coming in to pump throughout the day, they don't have those 4 hours that they get to go and pump whenever they need to. Or what about women who are particularly going through any type of monthly issues where they are physically hurting for a week on end, and they can't take that time because it's considered sick, not realizing that that is literally a part of their body that we're now discriminating against and saying, well, you have to show up or you can't have a job. All of these things that we talk about might seem like it's related to disability, but in actuality, it's related to human need. And the fact that we can't look at another human being and say, this is what you need, and I'm going to give it to you so that you can do the job. We're looking at another human being and labeling them as weak, disabled, unable. Let's put them in a corner. No, you don't belong. Whereas having the conversation, like Joe said, to actually diversify and include, not just be diverse, but figure out a way to include everyone and making sure that they have what they need to be able to not only be present at work, but to be able to do the job from wherever they're going to be, and allow them that space to flex how their disability is going to be incorporated into that workspace. And have an open mind. We forget that we have all of these structures, but these structures are literally made by other human beings. So you mean to tell me now that our mindset can't fathom a different structure to make sure that we can actually work and be profitable or be I'm looking for a word here, guys. Someone jump in where to be feeling as though they are committed and there and giving of themselves, right? Because like Rachel said, we are so grateful for the job. We'll do anything to keep it. So why can't we fathom the different structures so that we can be able to do what we want to do and love the way we want to do it?
Honestly, that's why I take umbrage with the phrase special needs, because our needs aren't special. They just make us a better worker. Eric, we have got a couple minutes left. Why don't you share your thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, so I think two things, and Joe and Andrea both addressed this a little bit earlier. But first, it's having the right attitude. I think that oftentimes when you're in certain work environments at certain organizations or certain companies, and you come to them with an accessibility need, the attitude will impact how you accept that. So if they come with a certain level of positivity and address the issue in a positive way, that isn't combative or isn't one of dismissiveness, I think that that is a very good first step. And then second, and I think as important, is people with disabilities should be in HR. People with disabilities should have that level of authority in terms of whether it's HR director or some other level within HR, so that that perspective gets brought in every single time an HR decision is being made. And it shouldn't come as some type of a volunteer opportunity. If you have a disability, can you please give some input on it? No, they should be hiring people in HR with different disabilities so that they can give perspective on what types of accessibility needs are needed at a given workplace. And those people should be able to move up in that space. So often, people with HR do not have any experience when it comes to understanding disability, understanding the different types of disability and the needs. And I know we keep kind of saying that accessibility is something that makes us better workers or that we might need, but it's also the law. It's important to know that as well, and for our employers, the organizations and corporations to understand that the ADA is the law, the Americans with Disabilities Act is the law, and it is important to that organization, to that company, that they follow the law in the right way by making their workplace as accessible as necessary, reasonable accommodations for an individual with a disability. That should not be something that people with disabilities need to beg for. That has already been fought for by advocates throughout the history of the disability rights movement, and it is signed into law. So that's not something that we should have to beg for.
Okay, fantastic. Are you guys ready for some Q&A? We have some brilliant questions from our audience. The first one is, it's a two-parter. Outside of your family, where do you find other sources of support? And the second part of the question is, what are the opportunities and challenges that COVID provides for disabled people and work? Pick one. Pick who feels moved by the question.
So
Andrea.
I'm going to start with the COVID. We realized during COVID that everything was able to turn on a dime the moment it affected every single person in the workforce. everything that people were asking for, those that had disabilities beforehand, whether it was to be able to work remotely, whether it was to be able to have a couple of days outside of the office, whether it was to be able to be just completely working on a computer in whatever facet that they needed to, we realized that it was able to happen when the mass majority needed it. But when our voices were asking for it beforehand, it was, we don't know if we can do this for you. We're not sure if we can implement this. This is not going to be able to be done. You need to come into the office. No, you can't take a half a day before to take care of your needs. And now we are all doing this. And as we start to transition back, okay, maybe not so much back right now because we're all on like different levels of closing and whatnot. But when we do start to transition back into that full workforce, the transition piece is now saying, wait a minute, with my disability, I can work from home. With my disability, I can be remote and I don't have to be in the office 4 days a week. And are we going to allow for structural nuances to say, well, your disability means that you have to be in the office? Or are you going to allow someone with a disability to have those accommodations in place that we were asking for way before COVID? I worked the front lines of COVID. I was on a COVID ICU floor. I was taking care of patients with COVID. And on the flip side of that, now 6 months or a couple months past this contract, I'm still having employment issues. And I say that openly because the point is that this fight isn't over just because now COVID has shifted some of our thought processes. It's now even going to be more so because now we're protecting our health. Now we're already protecting our mental health. Now we're trying to figure out what structurally where we belong in this new system of found opportunity. And now we have to figure out what this verbiage looks like and how do we put forth that verbiage to someone who is in HR or someone who we're going to be interviewing in front of and needing to list our accommodations off the bat. So COVID has opened the door and then put all of these barriers up in front of it just as much as it has opened it.
That's fantastic answer, Andrea. And it parlays into a second question from Donna Lee. Hi, Donna. How do you, or can we as a community have genuine proactive conversation with HR and or corporations on best practices for hiring? And oh my goodness, they just took my question out. On hiring, did you just, she just said hello. Basically, how can we have genuine conversations with HR for hiring and talking about disability?
I just want to jump in real quick too. What Andrea was saying before, I think in our COVID world, now that everything or a lot of things are on Zoom, it does make it more accessible for a lot of us. But then I've also been talking to some people, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but this chat feature is super fun. I love all the conversations, but it's also inaccessible to people who are blind or low vision. I think it has something to do with the screen readers. So there's still that, and the ADA can't keep up with all of the technology booms that we're having, because, you know, I think it should have to be, yes, digital access is the issue, exactly. So even though everything's online now, which makes it more accessible for, you know, someone like me who has trouble with the New York City transportation sometimes, it's still not accessible for everyone, and it's a shame. But to answer that question about, you know, HR, from my understanding, you know, if you have a disability and you go in for a job interview, you don't have to disclose what your disability is. You don't have to disclose how you became disabled, why you're disabled, family history. You don't have to say any of that. You just have to have a standard job interview. And if the person interviewing asks about your disability, you can mention any accommodations you might request, but legally they can't ask you to say what your disability is. So, yeah.
It is fine. I will share a tidbit. I used to not disclose my disability ahead of time. I am a wheelchair user. I'm a scooter user. And I, you know, You can't tell from my picture that I have a disability. You can't tell from my Zoom. And I would get to a building and I would call and say, I just wanted to make sure I can get in your building. And I would get the door slammed in my face. So I became an unapologetic scooter user, and I would confirm on the phone call because it was, 15 years ago. By the way, is your building wheelchair accessible? Because I am a scooter user. I would never say the words disabled because when I said disabled, they would be like, oh. And that became problematic for me. But my personal thought is when you have a conversation with HR, you are matter of fact, you are unemotional, and you state your needs clearly and without emotional, like I hate to say this, you speak as if you're a man. You don't apologize, you don't touch your hair, you look at them directly in the face and you don't back down. You don't say, may I have this? You say, this is what I need, and you don't leave the room until you get it. Because that's the only way. That's how you get accommodations as a disabled person. And then they hate you. But it doesn't matter because they can't fire you. But that's my 2 cents as the moderator. Anyway, let's get another question. Let's see. What are your best approaches to addressing internalized ableism? That is a good one. Anyone? Bueller? Joe?
Ooh, that's a big one.
I want to hear Joe's.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in really quickly. But one thing that was very difficult for me is that I didn't know anybody else who was disabled or who had disabilities. And it wasn't until I got older that I started to become more involved in the disability community. And I also started following amazing people on Instagram, social media, and surrounding myself with positive examples of what it looks like to live with a disability. And by surrounding myself, I think I really lived up to that quote. Um, I think it goes something like this: you are the average of the 5 people closest to you. And by forming that sense of community around me, it naturally reinforced the idea that, hey, I am worth it, and that ableism doesn't have to be my dominant mindset or narrative.
That's fantastic. What about you, Rachel?
I mean, I feel like there's so much internalized ableism as well. I have been learning about disability history, and I came across the ugly laws and was just blown away that this was a thing until the 1970s, which was not that long ago. And I think sometimes we internalize that feeling of, oh, I'm not worthy to go out and be seen in public with missing my leg. I experienced that a lot. And I think that by putting myself into writing stories and working towards more authentic representation, just focusing on my work and everything that I can offer to the world is really how I dealt with, any insecurities caused by disability. And yeah, I mean, this year with the pandemic happening, I made a documentary called How Much Am I Worth, which featured Andrea. And it's about the health insurance industries, especially at a time during COVID, where everyone's having healthcare issues. So I think it's really important to, just focus on the things that are in your control and not the things that are out of your control when it comes to ableism.
Okay, that is fantastic. And just for what it's worth, when I was little, my mom constantly would say to me, and she's my biggest supporter, by the way, I'm really glad that you're pretty, so we don't get any pushback. I'm really glad that you're pretty. And that was when I was walking all the time. And not to sound like a narcissist. Eric.
I think that's something a lot of women get too. Like I get all the time, oh, at least you have a pretty face. All the time. I think that's something a lot of
Really
women
strange.
get. Yeah.
Eric, what do you, oh, actually, Eric Christina Burke says hello. And to her favorite fellow Borpy. And she asks, has anyone ever experienced when someone has previously underestimated you or behaved in an ableist manner, come forward and recognized you recognize their previous behavior after you've achieved some success? Do you need me to repeat that?
Yeah, if you could repeat that, that'd be great.
Okay, so someone has been ableist, a jerk, shall we say, and after you've become successful, they've come forward and said, hey, you're successful. I'm really sorry I was a jerk.
You know, I'd probably really have to think hard about it, to be honest. I don't know how many times, I could probably count it on one hand how many times somebody has been ableist and then has come back to me after they either noticed that I was somebody important, whether it's I have worked for some really cool elected officials, worked on President Obama's reelection campaign in 2012, um, or the fact that I went to law school, I have a legal education, and work with other lawyers. Um, but I honestly, it has been really rare that somebody will acknowledge when they've been ableist. And it's been interesting because throughout my life, there have been moments where I will get treated in a way that is discriminatory. Um, but I have to pause and sometimes take a moment because I don't know whether that person is being ableist or whether that person is being racist. And it's a weird kind of space to be in. But something that, this panel has talked about earlier is I developed a sense of pride in who I am and what I represent. I have a sense of pride in being an African American male with a disability. I know how powerful it is to have an African American male in a wheelchair in the state capitol or on the Hill in Washington D.C. or going on Wall Street in New York. I know how powerful of an image that is and how powerful that is for kids with disabilities all over the country who didn't know or hadn't seen an African American male in a wheelchair before do some of the things that I've been able to accomplish. Whether it's been, as I said, in the workspace or as an athlete, I think that some of these images, and I know, we spoke a little bit earlier about some of the images that we see on social media, on Instagram and Facebook and others. And that's another level of it too. And I mean, I'm so excited for, the work that Rachel and Andrea both do, how visible they both are in terms of being in the health space for Andrea and being in the film space for Rachel. Those are two spaces that people go through, people come through all the time in terms of everyday life. And so you're changing minds all the time and every day when folks are able to experience, both of you in the workspaces that you guys are both in. So I take that very seriously when it comes to the way I'm portrayed and the way I see myself and the way others see me in terms of being a wheelchair user.
Awesome. What about, does anybody else feel inclined to answer this question? Anybody have the experience or? Okay. So Takia Hartwell wants to know if there are any ways of working around digital inaccessibility from, because we were touching upon that from a recruiting standpoint. So are there any, Eric, you actually might, or Joe might actually be the two people who will be able to touch on this the best from a recruiting standpoint. Are there any kind of workarounds for our blind and deaf compatriots?
In terms of workarounds, are we talking about tools that make it easier to access the workplace?
I believe so, yes, from like a recruiting standpoint.
Okay, well, in general, I use a lot of transcription devices that in real time transcribe everything that I'm saying. So this tool is called Otter, and I usually just put it right in front of my laptop and use that to transcribe everything. And it's kind of, it's close to 95% accurate, and sometimes has the most hilarious mistakes that I just started laughing at. The other one that Google has been doing a good job of building accessibility tools into their products, namely Google Hangouts and Google Presentations or Google Slides. If you go to the bottom of a Google Hangout, you'll see closed captions, and they are really effective as well. And then also just the processes that we use in meetings, like using sticky notes or other tools like that. We do have tools like Mural, which is an internet whiteboard that has made meetings more accessible for me as well.
Wonderful. We have about 15 minutes left. I would love to know if you guys have any final things that you would love to say, all of you. Why don't we start with you, Rachel?
Sure. I actually thought this was over at 8:15, but I'm thrilled to have a little more time. Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here. This has been such an enlightening conversation for me as well. I love connecting with the community, and I always take what I gather and put it into my work and my stories. And coming up next for me is expanding How Much Am I Worth into a feature-length film. We're working on some grants right now to really, right now it's a 6-minute film. It's been touring the world. It's going to Slam Dance Film Festival in February. And I'm just blown away by the support for it. I think right now is the time for a film about health insurance through the lens of people with disabilities. So we're going to expand that and make it into a feature. And I'm really excited for that. I'm also working on a comedy script to lighten things up a little in my life. And it's about a group of friends in their 20s, 30s with disabilities who are just people living their lives, trying not to set their lives aflame in the professional and love life and all of that stuff. So that's what I'm working on right now. And I finally, just wanted to note, the pandemic has wreaked havoc on the film industry, and I was out of work for quite a while, and finally just this week was approved for unemployment. So it took a while, but it's a tough world out there, but we're getting through it. So yeah, thank you everyone so much, and feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I'm at bionic.brunette. I'm also on Facebook, but that's more just like family and friend things. And you can go to my website, rachelahandler.com, and feel free to ask me any questions about working in the industry. If you want to be an actor, writer, producer, I'm happy to be as helpful as I can.
It turns out Rachel was right, and I was just giving us the luxury length of the event. So we are finishing up around now, but everybody gets their last comments. So Eric, go to it.
Yes, first, I definitely want to thank you guys for having me. It's been definitely a pleasure. You're a West Coast representative on here. I know all you guys represent the East Coast, but it's good to be in these spaces and to speak, positivity and to speak about disability pride. I think that, these panels, especially during a time of COVID, where people might, go through struggling times in terms of whether it's their finances and employment, whether it's not being able to interact with their friends and family members. This is a very challenging time, especially for people with disabilities who have to be extra careful because of conditions that we all might have, where we can't put ourselves in a situation where we could contract this deadly virus. So I'm glad that we're able to have this type of setting. As far as kind of what's coming up next, the PNAs, and I know that I didn't get a real chance to talk much about this, but protection and advocacy organizations are in every state and territory in the United States. I work for Disability Rights California, which is our protection and advocacy organization here. They have one, as I said, in every state, and it's funded and supported largely by the state government and the federal government. And so they are a great opportunity and a space for people with disabilities to reach out if they have any questions about certain laws or certain legislation in their states, to really get some information on types of advocacy when it comes to disability rights. And they can also be a really good space to go to when you want to be connected to the disability community in your city or throughout your state. So I'd really encourage everybody to be a part of that. Disability Rights California just got a new executive director who's pretty well known in the Washington, D.C. area and throughout kind of the U.S. Capitol space. His name is Andy Imparato. He's also been the executive director of the American Association for People with Disabilities, as well as the ALCID, which of course is for the university system for people with disabilities. So I think that these are all resources and these are all spaces where people can go to. And Andy, our new executive director, has been very intentional about intersectional work, about reaching out to communities of color, making sure that the disability community understands and is intersected with all of these other communities, as we discussed earlier. So it's a really exciting time. As Andrea said earlier, I mean, COVID, as challenging as this situation has been for so many throughout the country and throughout the world, it's opened some doors for some people with disabilities in terms of being able to work from home, being able to provide for themselves in that way without having to beg and scratch and crawl for the types of accommodations that we discussed earlier. So I hope that this time period is an opportunity for us as a disability community. And as far as reaching out to me, I am on Facebook. I'm as Eric Harris. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, which I don't use a ton, but I use it kind of enough to like reach out to folks and connect with people. So my Instagram and my Twitter are at EMONY21. And I encourage anybody who wants to connect with me on there.
Great. Thank you so much. Andrea, anything?
So, my last words of wisdom for anyone who is in here who is struggling, just know, like we've all mentioned, that you're not alone. That's one. The best thing you can do is reach out and ask for help for whatever it is that you're going through, even if it is just to talk through uh, what you're feeling. Because, like Eric said, and like we've all mentioned, these times are hard. COVID is not something that we are being able to have a grasp on for ourselves in a way that works for us, because COVID can literally kill us. Uh, it is something that we are safeguarding our own mental stability with our family. We're safeguarding it with our disabilities. We're safeguarding it with how we approach society. So you should be talking through what COVID is doing for you in terms of employment, in terms of personally, mentally. We should be talking through those things. The second part of that is understand that you have worth, that you belong, and that anyone who's telling you that you don't belong or that you don't fit in or they can't do something to accommodate you doesn't work. Find that voice that I tried to find or should have had when I was pushed into the corner or told that I couldn't. Find the voice now to say that you have worth, you belong, and that you will not take no for an answer, and that you will find the answers that you need. And one person telling you no does not mean that everyone's going to tell you no. I have faced those interviews. I have been through the process of being told no numerous times to the point where my yes came during a pandemic. So you just need to validate that yes for yourself and just saying that you belong and that you have worth and that your voice matters. And whether it's in disability, whether it's in mental health, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in policy or entertainment, wherever it is that you feel that you want to be, just know that you are worth being there and you have worth to be there. And that voice that we all have inside of our heads that we shouldn't be there actually shouldn't be there. That voice needs to be silenced.
Sure.
And keep talking positive over yourself, because we already are faced with so much with society telling us that we don't belong, that it's so hard to come onto these webinars and talk about having employment, knowing that I have employment and I'm secure, but then hearing Rachel telling me that she just got unemployment insurance. So what does that mean for our actual community? What is our community going through? We are struggling, and this is not easy. So I'm encouraging you all to please reach out, know that you have worth in your value, and know that your voice is valued among the disability community, because we need to hear it. You can't sugarcoat these things for ourselves, because then we end up sugarcoating it for society that then gets to throw it back at us saying, well, we gave you. No. So that is my final 2 cents. And you guys can always find me on Instagram at The Seated Nurse or on Facebook at The Seated Nurse. And feel free to email at theseatednurse@gmail.com.
Great. Thanks. Now, Joe, bring it home.
Thank you so much for those wonderful words, by the way. It was a real reminder for me. I have been struggling quite a bit for, the past 9 months since the start of COVID. And I have been feeling quite isolated and alone in a lot of regards. And it's a really powerful reminder to know that we're all in this together and that we're not alone. So I really appreciate you saying that, because that made my whole week. And I also want to practice, what I preach. I do apologize to the people who rely heavily on lip reading. I didn't do quite a good job of lighting my face to ensure that everybody could see my face, but I promise I will make that better for next time. And I really, I'm incredibly grateful for everyone that put this together and everyone that's here. I'm really honored to be part of this community.
Thank you guys so much. We received so many questions, and if we didn't get to yours, they will be brought up as conversation starters in the disability community on Facebook. We will also be sharing this recording there on Facebook for further interaction. So be sure to engage Diversability on Facebook. And now, I can't do a drum roll because I don't have a drum. But the grand prize winner of our Patty and Ricky personal styling experience is MLOD 729. Congratulations. Thank you so much for participating in our giveaway. Tiffany, did you want to say anything? Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate all your time and your sharing, and just thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you all so much for everything.
Did you want me to say anything?
That's up to you, my friend.
Sure. So I'm just going to close really quickly. So great to see so many friends on this panel. For those of you who are new, I'm Tiffany Yu. I'm the founder of Diversability. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an East Asian woman with long black hair wearing a blue top. If you're new to Diversability, it was really created because I wanted to root myself in a disability community. I became disabled when I was 9 as a result of a car accident where my dad also passed away and I paralyzed one of my arms. And I think similar to what Eric said, we're all essentially on the same team. And I really wanted to find other people who were on my team. And so part of the work that we do is I talk a lot about origin stories. We have 2 origin stories. The first is when we become disabled. And the second is when we take ownership over or even pride in our disability identity. And so what Diversability is on a mission to do is to try to get as many people as possible to that second origin story and beyond. And I think all of the panelists on tonight's session were amazing examples and role models for all of us. So if you are interested in staying connected and staying involved, please join the Diversability community on Facebook. You can also follow us across social media at Diversability, and you can also join our newsletter. So I'm super glad. Thank you to Kieran. Thank you, Joe, Eric, Andrea, and Rachel. And a shout out to our ASL interpreters and the captioning as well. We definitely want to host more events, but as you can tell, we try and compensate all of our panelists. We have interpreters, we have captioning as well. So all of this is a little bit of a production on the back end.
Thank you all so much. Have